Welcome to the Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Filmmaker podcast, hosted by Charles Aline and Dr. Christopher C. Odom. On this episode, we speak with international and domestic multi-award-winning filmmaker and digital media scholar, yours truly, Dr. Christopher C. Odom, MFA, PhD, about my recent documentary short film, Justice for George Floyd, The Tipping Point? This episode is sponsored by the Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Film Festival, which is dedicated to ensuring that Caribbean and Latino filmmakers have a voice that's heard and a wide audience to showcase their work.
Wanted to welcome everyone to our show, our podcast, Our Vision Caribbean Latino Filmmaker Podcast. Today we have a different format. We're going to be interviewing one of our hosts, Dr. Christopher Odom, and he's going to talk about his documentary, Justice for George Floyd, The Tipping Point. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk about my latest project on the show.
All right, Chris. So what made you want to become a filmmaker?
Ooh, that's a very long story, but to try and truncate that story, I originally went to school at Morehouse College, and I was 18 years old. I was young. I had a lot of problems. I dropped out of school, and in my search for significance, the arts began to appear in my life as a pattern. And over a period of time, and in speaking with some different teachers and counselors at Georgia State University, I decided to leave Morehouse and go to Georgia State University and become a film major, because it seemed like it integrated all of the things that interest me: music, film, fashion, storytelling, dance. It just seemed to really bring everything that I was interested into one message. When I was younger, I wanted to be an actor, but I thought I was too old. I was 8, and Gary Coleman was already on Different Strokes. So I was like, it's too late. I'm too old. I mean, because you got to start when you're young. I always was intrigued by the media in school. My teachers would always say, if you want true power, you want to own something in the media. They were talking about like a magazine, a news network, but media influences people's minds, which influences culture, which influences things that can also impact legislation. And so, the seed was planted that I wanted to be a storyteller. And at my age of 29, every filmmaker of color was really inspired by people like Spike Lee and Robert Townsend, Keenan Ivory Wayans. These were people that looked like me, that were close to my age, that were out there doing it, which told me it was possible that someone like me could be a filmmaker. I remember my senior year in high school, my brother was in school at Syracuse University, and he came home one semester and he's really excited. He was like, "Hey, Chris," because, he knew I was always in the arts. He was like, "Man, I took this film appreciation class and I heard about this guy named Spike Lee. He was our age and he made a movie." And I was like, "Oh my God, how does somebody our age make a movie?" I didn't even know people like us were allowed to make a movie. And that just really planted the seed. In that same senior year in high school, I had the opportunity to perform with my trumpet in the junior NAACP AXO competition, which is a nationwide competition. And there at that competition, there was a young man my age competing for filmmaking. He was the only one who made a film. They said the film wasn't good enough to give him an award, but they gave him an honorable mention. And I was like, man, somebody in high school that looks like me made a film. And that had planted the seed. And when I went to Morehouse, I saw the filmmaking in the catalog. I wasn't quite ready to make that leap, but it was always itching. I'd always go back to it and say, man, this sounds interesting. And It wasn't later until a few years later, I dropped out of school. Morehouse wasn't working for me. And I was working third shift at a Walmart, unloading boxes. And I ran into a guy from Florida. You seemed to know my old crew when I lived in Orlando in high school for about 14 months. And he brought up a friend of mine. It was like my best friend in Orlando. He's like, Dexter Minchan. I was like, yeah, that was my best friend. And he's like, yeah, the guy who died. And I was like, I didn't know. And my last memory of Dexter was he came up to Morehouse to visit. I was kind of being an ass, and I was like, "You need to come to me. I won't come to you." And I missed the last opportunity to speak with him, and so
Oh man,
became filmmaker. But what happened was, in travesty, there is triumph because hearing the news that someone that close to me had died in a car accident driving home from FAMU, and it was actually a church member back in Orlando who was drunk driving in a pickup truck and ran into him and knocked him and the car off a bridge, and they died on contact. But that kind of just woke me up in reality, and I got out of the situation I was in, and I moved home to Nashville, got my life together, came back to Atlanta, enrolled in school at Georgia State University as a film major, and then I just stuck with it ever since. And so that's a long story with a somewhat truncated answer.
Man, I mean, it touched me just listening to that, because it's important that we have last moments with individuals because we don't know when it's going to be the last moment. So, telling that story was very, very heartwarming, and it sort of inspired you to get your life together because I guess you were thinking, well, you know what? We don't know when it's our last moments here on earth. So why not do the things we love to do? Why not pursue our passion? That's what I got out of that story. And it was really a great story. But in your telling of your journey, you mentioned Spike Lee and Robert Thompson. Do those individuals like who inspire you? What filmmakers inspire you and inspire your work?
Well, having gone to film school, there's lots of, there's the people, I won't say that they ram down your throat. There's like, the interesting things that Orson Welles is doing, there's Kurosawa, that there's lots of people. But as a person of color, it was really kind of like Spike Lee that opened the door that I could be a filmmaker. Robert Townsend, the Five Heartbeats, Hollywood Shuffle. I could be a filmmaker. Key and Ivory Wayans, I'm going to get you, sucker. For Low Down Dirty Shame, I could be a filmmaker. And then at some point, at my age, the digital transformation was beginning to happen, and pretty much anyone who could put a feature film in the can was like a god to me. I remember I was interviewing with an agent once at William Morris, and he said, yeah, he had made a feature, it wasn't any good, but he was still just like a god. Anybody who could make a movie was a god. Charles Elaine. When I met Charles Elaine, he had made a feature film and he made it on film. It might as well have been for $5 billion. At that time, it was very difficult to make a feature film, especially on film. That is so expensive. You got to develop the negative. You got to find the money. And then I was like, Charles Lee, that was motivating me. I was in the Organization of Black Filmmakers, and there were people like Donovan who had made what he'd called, six $3 movies, but still he got it done. Anybody could get a film in the can, was just like a general in the army. Whatever they had to say, I was listening. That was very inspiring that it could be done.
I mean, back in those days, you had to be like a producer, you had to be a salesman. Because I remember when we did Justin Brown, I shot it on film. Every day was me negotiating something, negotiating the development, negotiating. I mean, it makes you into a true independent filmmaker, you know. I think with digital, I love digital. I have no problem with digital and stuff, but I also miss the aspect of negotiating everything. You know, I had to negotiate just getting film at a decent price because I didn't have a budget. I had to negotiate and getting it developed. It was just one of those things that make you a true filmmaker. That experience for film makes you a true filmmaker because you have to negotiate. You're constantly having to sell yourself, sell your movie. And it's something special about that, you know. So I truly appreciate what you just shared with us. Also, I want to ask you, at this moment in your life, you're a independent filmmaker. You did your documentary. You're a college teacher, also a college professor. What would you consider some of the highlights of your career?
Uh, some of the highlights of my career when I really thought stuff was taking off. I did this short documentary feature called "How to Make It in Hollywood Before You Make It." It was my own version of private school for filmmaking. I wanted to learn how to finish a feature, how to take it to a film festival, make a press kit, do the quality control, get it distributed, and for a piece of content I made for $500. It went everywhere. That screened in like 12 festivals. It was very exciting to go on stage. It was very exciting to get a distributor. And I did everything. I shot it, I edited it, I directed it, I wrote it. I even made the DVD cover, the poster, and then I even got my own UPC code, shrink wrapped it in my house, and drove it out to the San Fernando Valley, the boxes of copies of the DVD to the warehouse. At that time, Amazon Prime had bought a company called Create Space that where you could have like sell your DVDs on Amazon or do them print on demand. And I was one of the first DVDs listed in Amazon Prime, and the New York Times did a story, and they were saying there was everything in there from Batman to How to Make It in Hollywood Before You Make It by Christopher C. Odom. I was like,
Yeah,
wow.
that's really great. I also went to school on that film too because I helped. Yeah, I think I was like doing the lights on the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You helped the lighting director.
Yeah,
Yeah, you helped out with that.
I have a credit as lighting director on that, which was really cool. I mean, and I mean, it was a great experience for me seeing you putting that whole thing together and seeing how it became so successful and it went everywhere and you really had a positive experience from it. I mean, so now you have this what's it? You have like a career, so to speak. It's not the career you want, but you are you are a filmmaker. You're making stuff and you're putting it out there. And so now here we are. And what led you? I'm trying to, make that exchange. What led you to go ahead and make your documentary about George Floyd? What brought you to this point?
Wow, it's a lot of factors. In I guess the fall of 2019, I began my journey to get a PhD in text and technology, digital media at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And texting technology is an multi, and transdisciplinary system of thought where you borrow from different the fancy word would be epistemes, epistemologies, different areas of knowledge, because people from different areas of knowledge think about the same problems but differently, and so you borrow from different areas to find solutions to problems typically stemming from social justice and social change. And while I was entering this program where it was like, I just want to study social media, how to brainwash people, sell some product. I noticed my classmates, when they would go around the room and talk about what they were researching, it was so ennobled. I was like, I need to get with the program. And so I was like, I need to. And then I remember I saw some information about becoming a Ford Fellow, and they were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm like, well, if that's what they're into, I need to add that to my work. Then that first or second semester, first year, I had learned about semiotics. And semiotics is the study of systems of meaning. Semiotics is dealing with language, systems of meaning. And so it's kind of like symbolism. And so like a book, it literally denoted, the dictionary definition means a book, but a book also has a connoted meaning. It could mean the holy book, or the book of life, the book of dead. And so I was interested in visual semiology. I was interested in visual rhetoric, how to persuade people with visuals, tapping in to the greater meaning of what a visual means. And I was interested in narrative, storytelling. And so I wrapped the semiotics, the rhetoric, and the storytelling together, and I applied it to social media because I knew I wanted to do something with social media. And I knew, I was a filmmaker. I was going to shoot a movie as part of my dissertation. And then George Floyd, it didn't happen to me. It happened to the world. George Floyd happened to the world. And as things were going on in my second year, I did what was called the Association for the Organization of Internet Researchers. I did what was called a doctoral colloquium. And my mentor at that time listened to all the things I was interested in. And she said, why not George Floyd? And she's like, the tipping point. You mentioned the tipping point. That sounds like it would be a great title, which I borrowed from Malcolm Gladwell. And I was like, this is it. I was just so overwhelmed by what was going on, from, the 4 years of Trumpism, people in the streets. I had the comorbidities for COVID. People were saying at that time, they're like, you don't really need to worry unless you're Black, over 50, have diabetes, blood pressure, and high cholesterol. I mean, those people, they're dead if they go on a ventilator. And they're like, oh, and if you're Chris Odom. Oh my God. I was terrified. And so I couldn't go out in the streets, or rather I wouldn't go out in the streets. And my way of giving back was doing this research into the justice for George Floyd protests as a social movement. And ultimately, the culmination of my research provides 10 strategies for social movements where they can use visuality and narrative to help advance the aims of the social movement. And that happens in my written work for my hybrid dissertation. It happens in my artistic generative code-based works for my dissertation. And it also happens at the conclusion of my documentary for my dissertation. So I basically made like 3 dissertations. I'm very much into excess. I'm the kind of person where, if you're not going to hire me and you're not going to work with me, it's going to be because you chose to. It's not going to be because you could say I wasn't qualified or couldn't do the work. I'm going to make you say it's just because we chose not to. And that's why I did a triple dissertation, not to mention doing a dissertation in the middle of COVID. Some people were going to say it was a lesser dissertation because half of my class work was on Zoom and not face-to-face the traditional way.
Wow.
In 2020, we had a hard right turn from the age of Obama to the Trump presidency. On top of that, we had a global pandemic. Then in May, there was George Floyd. It lit a spark. Was justice for George Floyd the tipping point?
It was probably just a teapot waiting to blow up. Social media is immediate.
Without the video, we wouldn't know anything.
There was a way to kind of connect and say, you know what, I'm feeling this too.
You can't really have justice for George Floyd because he's dead.
Minnesota
Is Mississippi buried under snow?
You saw, like, from start to finish, the end of a man's life.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter, find the defendant guilty.
I can't breathe.
Bro, get up, get in the car, man.
I will.
Get up, get in the car.
I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole time,
That's incredible, man. So I was listening to you talk right now, and something that sticks out in my mind, a word that you said that sort of like sticked out at me. I'm saying, what does that mean? You used the word tipping point. What is that? What does that mean? What is tipping point?
So Malcolm Gladwell, who is a prolific novelist, years ago, he had a very long article in, I believe it was the New Yorker, called The Tipping Point. This is in the earlier days of the internet, before virility, like a viral article was a thing. And this is one of the first articles to go viral. And he ended up getting $1 million book advance to turn that idea into the novel. And in his book, the Tipping Point, a tipping point is something that seems to happen all at once. It's almost viral, and everything starts to change. So in reality, there's always something that comes before a point. And so everything contributes to a tipping point. But with the Justice for George Floyd protests, there was so much going on. The Trumpism, kids in cages, some of them are good people, protesting in the streets, Colin Kaepernick kneeling, those sons of bitches. There was so much going on that the Justice for George Floyd, just Black Lives Matter, just took off like wildfire. And what became, a couple of people protesting in the streets or posting on social media, before you knew it, it was city after city in the United States. And suddenly there were people all over the world demanding justice, specifically for people of color. It changed the world. And, that's why I say it is a tipping point.
So you think the Justice for George Floyd protests as a social movement were a tipping point?
It was a tipping point where it made, as people say in school days when they rang the bell, wake up. It was a tipping point that made people wake up. Whenever you have a social movement, and a social movement has the perceived aims of achieving the social movement, whether it's true or not, then you have what's called anti-social movements, backlash movements. And since Justice from George Floyd, we've seen a lot of backlash from people who perceived too much change happening, whether it was true or not. But it was a tipping point in terms of awareness and motivating citizens around the world to go in the streets. But now we are in an experience of retraction as the economy is stilled. A lot of companies have quietly been getting rid of all the executives and departments they hired for diversity, equity, and inclusion during that whole George Floyd era. But for a moment, it put equality on the map. We've lost a little ground, but it's not about winning the battle. It's about winning the war. In the grand scheme of things, in a period of 20 or 100 years, a lot changes. But in a period of one's life, it can feel like nothing's changing at all. But things are changing, but it takes time.
Wow. I mean, that is like, when I think about that, right, I'm saying, like, what is your opinion of these? Do you feel that these companies just use this moment to brand themselves as an equity type of company, that we care about people, and they use social movements just to piggyback and promote themselves? How do you feel about that?
I mean, they're companies that, of course, were always very diverse, very equitable, and then there's opportunists. I mean, there's business, and there was definitely companies that were just jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, Black Lives Matter is hot. We should give some money to Black folks. Give it to Black Lives Matter. So yeah, there was definitely some opportunism, and from that opportunism probably speaks to which companies are having an attrition of diversity roles go away because it was just the flavor of the month.
Cool. So what I want to ask you now is like, what are you hoping to achieve by producing this documentary, Justice for George Floyd?
For society, I hope that this documentary, as well as the rest of my dissertation research, provides substantive strategies to allow social movements to preserve their history, their memory, and their narrative for future generations of activists, to inspire them and to help them impact, actual cultural and legislative change. For my career, get to the next level. I actually come from there's a lot of educators and civil rights activists in my family background. I actually learned in my cognitive science course that think of your mind as an organic computer, and when you're born, there's sort of, you know what firmware is in a computer, that's like the code underneath the code. And as a baby, from the ages of 1 to 2, you have firmware that develops, but your firmware is created sort of by your family. What is your family narrative? What is your family history? And then your firmware determines for the rest of your life which pieces of information that your brain stores and your memory that you can access readily accessible. So your regular memory, and then which pieces that are just kind of be like in the background that you can't easily access. And in that's called autobiographical future thinking. And so the family narrative was ministry, civil rights activism, education. I tried to do the arts thing, and then somehow I found myself swept up in education and activism, because that was the firmware that was running in my brain, and that's where I ended up ultimately.
When I think of justice for George Floyd, I think of that connective tissue. What I mean by that is that there's protests all over the world. There's always people that are oppressed, and it's fighting to, always like, hear my voice, hear my voice. I want to be a human. I want to exist in this world. And justice for George Floyd, for me, is saying, hear my voice. I want to exist in this world. And I think this documentary is a powerful documentary. And I like the Justice for George Floyd because it has that connective tissue where it connects every human being. As human beings in this world, we struggle, and we want people to understand that we have rights. We're equal to everyone else. We love, we cry, we have sorrow, we have happiness, and it's all that justice for George Floyd. It's all there. It's saying we want justice for the world. And I really appreciate, you as a filmmaker putting this together and bringing it out to the world. And now my question to you is, as an audience, where can we see this? How can we see it?
Well, right now I am gearing up for the 2024 Film Festival schedule. I've began submitting it to many film festivals such as Sundance, the Los Angeles Pan-African Film Festival, and God willing, we'll be in Sundance in January, or in the Pan-African Film Festival in February. But over the next year and a half, I'm hitting the festival circuit really hard, and you'll be able to see Justice for George Floyd, the short version of the documentary, in a city near you soon. To find out where Justice for George Floyd will currently be screening, you can keep up with news, updates, and Q&As on the film's website, which is justicefilm2024.com.
Thank you, Chris. My question to you is, what's next? What's next for Dr. Christopher Odom?
Aside from screening Justice for George Floyd, the tipping point on the festival circuit, I'm also working on a book. The academics prefer that you write, in some scholarly journals. I may do that, but I'm really kind of passionate with my background and what's important to me in my feature filmmaking is making a book. And after turning some of the Justice for George Floyd research into a book, hopefully I will expand this into a feature documentary. And I was thinking maybe instead of another movie, I was thinking about maybe doing some sort of online streaming series, something similar to Kamali Bell's Shades of America, CNN, if you're listening, but without the comedy.
That's really cool. I'm looking forward to the book. That would be exciting. That would be really great to see you as a publisher, person who's published a book and have something out there. On this program, what we like to do with all of our guests, and that includes you, is like, what advice do you have for inspired filmmakers and media makers?
As a film professor of 12 years, and I'd like to add media maker professor of 12 years, if I could water it down to two words, it's social media, social media, social media. You're going to hear a lot about people that say the problem in this culture are the tools, and not true. A tool is a tool. I don't care what that tool was created for. Me, you, and every other person on this planet has something magical. It's called autonomy. Like, it doesn't matter if this is a thermos. I can use it as a paperwork. I have autonomy. Social media is a tool. It's a powerful tool. Money is a tool. It's a powerful tool. And some corporations, some people, some conspiracy theorists, they recognize when a tool is powerful and they use it for nefarious reasons. But if you recognize that a tool is powerful, you can also use it for empowering reasons. You don't need an FCC license anymore. You don't need permission from the studio. You don't need, a series deal. You can pick up your phone and create a YouTube channel and be a network and be a studio, be a podcast, be a talk show, be a film series in a matter of minutes. There are people in my private YouTube groups who've gotten there was a lady who got 1.6 million views on a video she shot on her iPhone of just putting on makeup. She was a licensed cosmetologist, and it was how to cover scar makeup. And she showed all her real scars, and she went from jacked up to Janet Jackson in 9 minutes. And it was 1.6 million views. Mr. Beast, who's the biggest YouTuber ever, he created his own category where he does pranks and stunts for charity. This wasn't a thing. He invented it. He gets like 80 million views per video. He has over 100 million followers. He created himself out of nothing in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, I believe, where he lives. You don't need permission. Give yourself permission. And if giving yourself isn't permission enough, I give you permission to be what you want to be. You can do it now. You don't need anybody else. You can do it now. Take advantage of technology. The opportunity is there for you to seize it. Carpe diem, seize the day.
Wow, I'm going to repeat those two words: social media, social media. I mean, that's it right there. That's it in a nutshell. I mean, people have the opportunity to create themselves. There's no excuse. All right, Dr. Christopher Odom, thank you for coming on the show. Although you're one of our hosts for the All Vision Caribbean Latino Film Festival, this was amazing. Thank you, sir.
And you've got a film screening very soon, and I look forward to talking about your background and your screening that's coming up very soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Have a blessed and good day. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Click the link in our profile now to submit your film to the next Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Film Festival to share your work, reach your audience, and turn your dreams into reality.